Welcome everyone. We are live on YouTube and LinkedIn again, bringing you another exciting episode of the Top Innovator Series. This is where we dive into proven leadership ideas, game-changing strategies, and the brilliant minds behind them. I'm Joseph Martins, and I'm excited to introduce today's guest. With us today is Connor Sherman. Connor is the CISO of Updater, a company that makes moving easier for the 11 million households that move every year in the US. And they also have a division that facilitates the relocation of 350,000 service members every year. Before that, Connor has held various tech executive roles in the cybersecurity space, and one role that caught my attention in particular as a frequent traveler was that he was the VP of cybersecurity of Clear. Connor, it's a great pleasure to have you here today.
Joseph, thank you so much for having me. I gotta say, I was a little taken back when you reached out because I've been such a fan of what you've been doing and all the other leaders you've been bringing into the show. I was like, certainly not me. And then you reached out. So I just really appreciate the opportunity for us to have the conversation today.
Excellent, excellent. So I'm curious to hear what your leadership journey is like. You've been a successful leader, highly accomplished, and I'm sure there are moments of reflection where you ask yourself, how did I get to this place? What made that happen? So tell us, what do you think are the ingredients to your success? What's the recipe? What got you to where you are today, Connor?
Well, I greatly appreciate that. And it's going to sound, the way you're framing it makes it sound like there was a concrete plan. Actually, there was just a lot along the way. And so if anything I say resonates with the folks listening, I'm happy for that, because often the best lessons that we learn often comes through failure and then trying again. And it is like getting up and trying again. So maybe it's just helpful to understand that, like, I've been in, as you mentioned, in tech executive roles for about 15 years now. So rewind the clock to my time at private equity when I was a director of security at Apollo, left that, as you described, to go to Clear. Clear was really when I started to sink my teeth into transformations and turnarounds, if I had to really summarize it. So my career after that was really focused on who are working with companies who really needed something materially different done. And that's really important to know as a leader, what company are you in? And it's a lesson I learned later with some reflection that you're different as we develop skills and tool sets. We also have to understand, like, what's the culture and the temperature and the tone of the company we're in, right? So the tool sets a turnaround leader might have wouldn't necessarily be applicable to a company that's doing well in a steady state, or other people who are in a blitz scaling up, right? And so that would be kind of the first lesson, was as I was developing my leadership skills and learning that, first thing was to pay attention to where is the company in their life cycle, and then from there be able to use the right tools in that moment.
That's interesting, right? So what I hear you say is you're looking for a company that is a fit for what you would like to bring. I heard you say company that needs change. What did it take for you to discover that preference to provide something to that kind of company? Was that clear to you the whole time, or did that take a moment of discovery of where you might?
It took me going through working with a handful of companies to come back and say, what are the patterns when I did some reflection? I'm like, what is the pattern that is emerging from companies I'm attracted to? And one of the things that I think as leaders we all need to do is be able to be, as I mentioned, sensitive to the environment we're in. And then ultimately you kind of want to be in a spot where you're either kind of going down one of two paths. You're an individual who says, I'm going to develop a range of skill sets, tools, and methodologies, and then I can pick up different methodologies and frameworks as the company changes or as the opportunity changes, and you become this leader who's very adaptable. Or you could do something different. You can be like, actually, I'm gonna be really specialized. There are plenty of executives out there. I'm going to pick on turnarounds. They'll be the turnaround CEO, and all they do is they find something that's got value, but just needs that leadership, and they go there. So they become really specialized. And neither one is better than the other. They're just different. And I think that was one of the things I started to learn over time was, who do I want to be? Do I want to be someone who's specialized, or someone who has lots of tools and frameworks who can adapt to where we needed to go? And I kind of landed myself in the other camp, which was trying to keep myself as have myself most malleability as possible for that. So
I really can't remember anyone else having framed a preference quite like that, and I find that intriguing. So what I would love to know, Connor, is that something, is that kind of preference to be the one who brings change, is that something you experience only in your professional life, or is that you? Is that
That's
how you?
Great question. Thank you, thank you. Yeah, as we were discussing before air, it's like who we are, right,
Uh-huh.
really shows up in all these different ways. It's really hard over a long period of time to be different than who you are. And our
Right.
jobs influence our growth as individuals, and our individual growth helps who we are, and they come together. I've always been somebody who's been happy to jump into a mess, organize that mess, and then get people organized in a direction, right? That is just my temperament, my personality. If you bring me into a messy room, I'm going to say, let's get organized, let's get everybody excited, and let's go this way. Like, that's just kind of how Connor is.
Uh-huh.
One of the things that allowed me to see that about myself was over my career, I had the opportunity to work with some really great chief people officers who really focused on bringing tools to help leaders understand their team and understand themselves. And one of those was the DISC assessment, DISC.
Yep.
And in there, it's just a framework. It's just kind of one of those things that lets you look in the mirror, but a little more objectively. And in that, I learned like, oh, I thought I was like this unique special snowflake. Nope, turns out like most people fall into a bucket and fall into a category, and this just happens to be the one that Connor does. So I just kind of, that's how I evolved over time. But for me, giving myself that language of noticing that like there are patterns of how leaders show up, and this is the one I was showing up as, gave me a bit of confidence too, knowing that I wasn't off my rocker. I'm like, oh, this is just who you are, and this is how it works. And then you got your get the language around it.
Yep. Yep. Talk to me about the toolkit that you had to assemble to bring that kind of leadership to your organizations. Well, you mentioned DISC. I assume that's a tool that you also use with your teams.
Yeah.
But what other tools are there that you think are sort of top line item tools that you consider go-to tools that you need for your leadership?
Thank you. So when I one of the more over my career, I've had the opportunity to read lots of different management books, right? And we've all like read Good to Great. We've all read these kind of seminal books, and they're really good. And a lot of them have concepts like I really like the 20-mile march and these things. But there was one book that I read and I was introduced to by the CTO of one of the companies I work with, which was Turn the Ship Around. And this was a framework and a set of collections, and it's around this idea of intent-based leadership. And that particular framework coming out of that book really resonated with me because what it allowed me to do was create a language, or excuse me, bring that framework, introduce a language and a set of thinking to the rest of my team. And then because of that, we could build a culture and we could all have shared language and we could go forward. And so we can explore that. We can tell you more about that if you like, but that would be an example of another one where there's we live in a time and age when there's lots of options. So for me, it was as I'm kind of grazing along, I find something and it resonates. I just go deep with that. And that's what I did with intent-based leadership.
And I assume you bought the book for your team or for people around you, asked them to read it, did something with it. Is that the process, how you use that? Yeah.
So yes and. So
Okay.
often I want to give people the book like, hey, go read the original material because the author's going to say it better than I'm ever going to say it. But really, as a leader, like when we have something that you're trying to create a culture around, we do need to go deeper than saying like, here's a homework assignment. It's about training and making it engaging. So for example, I'm a real big believer in on-sites and making them fun and making them engaging. Certainly as a remote culture, a remote company like we work at now, having a period of time, whether it's annually or quarterly or some face-to-face, and in those face-to-face sessions, I'll give myself the homework of breaking down a book like Intent-Based Leadership into workshops and into interactive sessions. And then of course, it just so happens that this author has lots of great little clips that are on YouTube and like pulling it together. So I'll make a little session about that. And then comes the hard part, which is living it day in and day out over the space, which, comes and goes in waves, but it's that kind of sense of just trying to make it engaging. So for in our particular case, we ended up writing our leadership team, the team that reports to me, we wrote our own operating framework as leaders, like what's important to us, what's not important to us, how do we operate? And we were able to use a lot of the text out of that in a summarized way. And then we can just be a touchstone for us as time progresses.
Yeah, I really appreciate you saying that you have to live it as well. Right? It's easy to get something ready and roll it out as a training effort and then sit back and hope that everyone is going to do it now, right? But we stay in our own comfort zone and not make the difference. Awesome.
Totally. Yeah. You can have the world's best gym plan in the world, but if you don't show up there and lift the weights, like it's not going to happen. So
it's really tough then. Yeah. Talk to me about some of the mentors that you had on the way. What were some key people, or at least what was some key advice that you gotten over the years? What is something where you felt, I'm glad I know this, I'm glad someone shared this with me, and this is a key tool, a key insight that I've been using?
So mentors were really interesting because they're such these incredible forces of nature when you connect with somebody who's willing to give you that time, who's willing to give you those insights. And so, sometimes in our industry, we can over fetishize, oh, I must find the mentor who has been up to the top of the hill. My lived experience has been mentors tend to arise in moments when I least expected them to be there. But when I saw somebody and then the relationship started, I kind of like clue on like, oh, this person cares about me and they're willing to give me more than their job description says they can in time and attention. And then I go a little bit deeper with them. And so while there has been some intentionality in my career where I'm looking for that opportunity, it's not like I went to like findamentor.com. I have no idea what the website exists. And then you kind of like, so all that to say, like, it's been a bit of a messy journey for me, but I've been really blessed along my career to have people who care. And so it started off really early when my very first job was at Apollo Global Management, and I was on the support desk, and the like 3 layers above me was this director of technology of the company, and he just said there was something about me, and he said, you know what, I'm going to give this young man some extra attention and extra homework and extra projects. And so it just kind of like we had that rapport, and then I just really kind of hung on every word he said, and that really helped. And in my earliest parts of my career, it was less about what he was saying. I was learning how they spoke at that company. I was listening to how they presented themselves. And that was like my first mentor. And then I've had a few across my career.
So say more what it was then. It's how they present themselves, how they speak about the company. Make that real for me. What does that mean?
So I was working at a financial services company, getting started. I'm 20 something and I'm wearing an oversized suit just to give the head back to here. So I got the job. By interview to the job, I go to the men's warehouse, I pick a suit, and they're like, kind of fits in your budget, go. Right. So now you got a sense of Connor. So here I am. So when I was in this company, I realized very quickly, like the first thing I could do is like start to listen how they talked. So when you're in finance, they talk about a decision they would use phrase like, oh, the net of this is such, right? That's clearly like a weird accounting slang thing. But you say that, but you don't talk about, you wouldn't use that same phrase in a tech company where they would say, hey, you want to double click on something. So there's certain like little language changes in different environments. Also, I noted that like when we'd have meetings, I would pay attention to the body language of people in the room. I would pay attention to how people were dressing. I was paying attention to those kind of smaller, more subtle cues because, as you know, like, and so does your audience, 80% of what of our communication is nonverbal. So early on, and so what I would do is I was kind of reading the room, and then this mentor, I would pay attention to him. If I want to know what good looked like, I would just say, how did Ian Aguilar, this guy I still hold in great regard, show up to a meeting? How would he show up in a conversation? What did he say or not say? And so in addition to like listening to what was being told, I was also just watching him. And I think that's important as mentors. And certainly for us as we're later in our career and we start to assume that role as mentors to other people in the community, we have to remember that they're not just listening to what we say, they're listening to how we behave. And they're listening to what we're not saying. And they're listening to how we're dressing and how we're presenting ourselves. So there's all those other subtle cues that come into, I think, the rounding out the concept of a mentor.
And you're absolutely right. These are all cues, and based on my experience, a lot of tech executives focus on content, right? On what is being said and not on everything around it, on how it is being said or everything that you mentioned there. That's neat. Yeah.
And so again, as my journey continued, I was really blessed to have people. There was a time in my life where I was more religious than I am now, but there's this proverb in there, if I'm going to get it wrong, but it said something along the lines of wisdom is always crying out in the streets. And this idea that like, and always kind of sat with me. And I'm sure there are many other religious cultures that have this similar concept, which means the good things that are happening in life, like the wisdom, the thing that really latch onto, it's being said. The question is, are you listening? And so as I've gone through my career and such, I'm like always like, is there a lesson to be learned here that I wasn't expecting to learn? And just having that sense in your of me, I've I've had people say things who have taught me wonderful things, and they've been like the good kind of mentors. I've had the anti-patterns where I've like watched them be like, oh, we're going to avoid that lesson. And so just to take that out, like, but there's always in every opportunity, not every opportunity, but most opportunities, there's typically something to learn if we have an ears that are open and just kind of a mind that's ready to absorb it.
Really difficult to do, right? It's much easier to hear something and judge it and place it into our existing framework of what do I like, what do I not like, what do I agree with, what do I disagree with, what do I think is smart, what do I think is stupid, instead of asking the question, what is new? What can I learn here? I like that focus. Yeah. So we've talked about the past, Connor. We've talked about the trajectory you had so far. I'd like to take a look with you at where you are at the moment. When you look at your current experience of leadership, what is something that you're still working on? What is something where you have the sense, I have some skills, I'm accomplished, but there is another level of mastery. There is something where I can grow. What is that?
So my attention is currently focused on learning to prioritize the strengths of others on my team. So let me explain that a bit. What do I mean by that? So I find that most executives, especially things who kind of move fast in their career, they're high energy, high output. They get a lot done. They get things done well. Like that's kind of a natural ingredient that you see there. But what that can do is it can lead to an environment where the high output individuals are rising to the top, and that's not necessarily a good thing, right? We need teams that are more balanced than just the person who can do the most or say the most clever thing or whatever it is. So what I've been looking for and learning and spending more of my time as doing is asking myself, what are the skills of everyone on my team, not just my direct reports, but really kind of starting to cascade down, thinking it through the framework of like DISC, as I mentioned earlier. There are plenty of other things you can do, and say, all right, if I've got this team and everybody here has a different personality, everyone has a different lived experience, everyone's got different strengths they're bringing to the company, how do I as a leader help create the environment where those things are getting prioritized? And that's kind of feels like I'm reading out of a fortune cookie, but what I'm really trying to encapsulate here is, as many companies get oriented around delivery and they get oriented around execution and shipping the thing, well, those outcomes can only be achieved if there's an environment for people to really bring themselves. And I hold the belief that to do a good environment, it's not accidental. It has to be delivered, and it is the leader's job to create the environment. Coach the people, fix the environment. Don't try and fix your people. So that would be kind of, and that's something I really focus on. So if you ask me, where am I now? What am I paying attention to? It's that creating space for me to slow down such that I can ask myself, is there somebody on my team who has a strength that I could put in a different position, or not even like a role change, but just like in a project or in a communication stream or something, such that they can bring that particular strength they have to fruition and have the opportunity to grow and get better.
Tell me more about the details of how you do that. Are you using DISC as the exclusive tool for that, and you look for some fit in the team, or how do you determine, what does that mean in your weekly activities, what you do to get that alignment between people and the tasks that they have?
So I'm going to actually answer the question by telling you what I'm terrible at. What I'm terrible at, an individual, is someone who needs to sit down and do a lot of detailed analysis. But I have members on my team who, by golly, if you gave them spreadsheets for days, they would be happy to sit there and mine the data and look at things, and they're really going to care about the details. But that's not my strength. So if I'm starting to look at an opportunity where I'm like, okay, there's a lot of analysis that needs to happen here, I need to ask the question to myself, do we need to make a quick decision? Do I need to move the organization? Great. Those are my skill sets, right? Can I quickly get, like, what is the theme that's going to cut through all of this noise and get us moving? That's helpful. But sometimes you also need someone who can say, give me 3 weeks to sit on top of this problem, and I'm going to go really deep and make sure we don't make a mistake that's irreparable. And my job is to make sure when I see that class of problem, I turn around to my team and say, okay, I have this director or I have this IC, and then I engage them and say, hey, can you please help me? Or can you take over this project? These are the outcomes I'm looking for. So a little less formal than that, but like that would be the
I get it. And that's a really nice way to use a tool like DISC or similar ones to align the individual preferences, behavioral preferences with the work and the particular activity that's there. Nice.
There's another great book called Sparketype. And that was again, just another one of these tools that help you kind of put a name and give a name and a language to something. And that one's specifically around how you show up at work. And I really appreciated that book. And in a sense of like some frameworks are more personality oriented, like your Myers-Briggs, that's like who you are. But a Sparketype is trying to figure out like, how do you present yourself at work as a professional? It's interesting. You ask, do this assessment across your whole team, you'll be surprised by the answers that you're going to get from your team. And it's fantastic because then you've got this brand new language and this brand new way of like looking at your team and finding where their strengths are.
Yep. Great point, right? It also creates common language. You have something that you can talk about, and you can talk about it in a way that typically doesn't upset people. That's the nice way about these kind of assessments as well, right? You create that structure and you can say something to someone and about someone without this landing as being offensive.
You can talk about the object, not the subject.
Yeah. Correct. That's it. Thank you. That's it. Now let's take a look into the future and look into the foggy or cloudy crystal ball that we all have. If we were to talk again in 3 years, Connor, what would be different? What does your leadership look like in 3 years? And I'm not talking positions or companies or so. I'm talking about your development. What would you tell me has happened over the last 3 years? What's the next version of Connor as a leader like?
So it's a great question. I should probably have a better answer for you than this. But one of the things that I have been thinking about, though, and I'm certainly not the only one here, this is a bit more tactical. So it's more around it's really around the emergence of like how AI is coming out and like we're working differently. So I've been really thinking about this because in my particular role, I'm leading the AI efforts throughout our company to like think through how do we run the company differently with an AI first approach and such. And I think leaders across the board are going to have to think about two things. One is being more adaptable. What's worked for us as a professional for the last 10, 15 years isn't necessarily going to be what's going to happen in the next 10, 15. And we've always talked about like how plasticity is really important as a leader. As the rate of change increases, so does the rate of plasticity needs to measure that, needs to match that as well. So as individuals, it's that sense of like, where are my lessons that I'm going to learn? How do I change and how do I grow really quickly? So a small tactical example. Today, I'm looking for some help on a particular project. So I hit people up on LinkedIn and I said, hey, would you help me with this project? Booked everybody in for today. I had a round of everyone, like lightning round 30-minute meetings using Gemini for note taking. And then I'm going to analyze all of that in Gemini again and be like, okay, what was the quality of the answers? Because now I can have deep dive conversations with 12 different organizations in one day. I don't have to spread this over 3 weeks. And so there's a sense of like, we have new tools that allow us to think differently, not just do differently. So we can start to think about how we approach things differently. So what does that mean in leadership? I think ultimately it comes back to culture and environment. I want me to continue being somebody who prioritizes the environment that my team is working in and creating an environment where they feel exploration is important, learning really fast is important. They sense they can really start to explore more as things are changing fast. So that'll be part of the future. Certainly not all of it, but that'll definitely be a key concept there.
This is running through the many meetings and having the AI analyze the outcome of the meeting. That is neat. That is neat.
Yeah.
I like that. Yeah, you're right. And I get it, right? That accelerates it instead of, and I can see that in my past as well, spacing out the meeting so that there is enough time to reflect, take notes and whatever. And that's all gone. Yeah. Awesome. Let me ask you one last, go ahead.
I just want to say, I think as you were describing that, something else that came to mind to me is the tone of this AI component. A lot of people are saying like, we can do more faster. And it is very true, as the example I just pointed out there. But as you said that, I reminded myself, like, what we also need as leadership is to make sure we're creating space for reflection and going deeper. Because one of the failure modes I see coming to the tech community, coming to the business leadership community, is that we could end up being a culture of skimmers and people who are trying to and people who are moving a little too fast for their own good. So there's going to be this world of like, well, the AI said, or the AI aggregated. And I'm like, hold on a second. When does wisdom come into the conversation? When does peace become something that's really important that we bring to the workplace? So we, as leaders, we're going to have to wrestle with these too. I don't have good answers, but I think as we're thinking the evolution of good leadership in the future is going to be it's going to be individuals who say, we care about the environment the team is working in. We're going to create an environment of peace where people don't feel freaked out that like AI is going to steal their job. We're going to also create space for reflection, because and then, but there's going to be a lot of pressure to just do more faster. So I can see that's the tension that's emerging, and we're going to have to navigate it.
Yeah. Yeah, and I agree. The push will be to do more faster. So the focus is always on urgency rather than what is important. And I think what you described there as going deeper, that's the important part. And I hope there is the time, there is the space to do that. Let me ask you one last question. What do you think when you look at peers, not just in your company, but in your network, look at peers, other folks who are CISOs or in similar roles. What do you think is something that you have discovered as part of your leadership journey, something that you can see, and at the same time you notice so many others are missing it? So many others don't seem to have discovered that for themselves, and you wish they had.
Well, I'm getting one very specific example, one very specific insight, and it's related to the cybersecurity community. If you are someone who shows up in a service-oriented role, like in security, where you care about outcomes, you care about the mission, you care about the company, and there's that deep sense of like caring that comes with your profession. There is a mistake sometimes that we make as the security community, which is we think it's our job to fix all of the problems or to do all these things. But when we think about ourselves as not those who are responsible for stopping the breach and fixing all the problems, but when we start to reorient ourselves as people who are really well versed in risk, individuals and professionals who can talk to the executive team about what this body of risks they're not aware of, whether it's AI or cyber or whatever, and help them achieve their strategy. We move out of trying to be someone who fixes things and into someone who is communicating and coaching. That is a really important shift. When I was starting my journey as a CISO, I was given this, again, unexpected, wasn't looking for this advice, but I found it and I latched onto it because it was wisdom in the street. And it was the job of the CISO is to be someone who is a credible witness to the risk. It's our job to bring risks and options to the rest of the business team. Let them prioritize based on time and resources and objectives. And then we're bringing some thoughtful approaches and strategies to mitigate those risks. But whatever the funding decision, the time or attention decision comes in, that's okay. That's not on you. That's what you as an executive team have elected to do, and then we go. The failure mode is when we try as leaders to skip the middle part, which is the consensus building, the education, and the informed conversation, and go straight to the remediation and the fixing. And this is where we end up with a lot of burnout in my community, because we have a lot of people who aren't resourced to fix all the problems. And that's because they're not meant to fix all the problems. They're meant to bring the risks to the team so the exec team can have the appropriate conversations. So that is specific to my neck of the woods, but that is something I think that if more of the security leadership really adopted, we would be in a better spot because we'd be having more risk-informed conversations with the executive teams on the board.
And that's very often short-circuited. Got it. I like that phrase, credible witness to the risk. That almost has a religious touch to it, right? That witness in there. Connor, thank you so much. This was awesome. Many things that will get stuck in my memory. I really enjoyed the focus that you bring on improving or working on the culture and the tools that you use for that. And the other thing that really stuck with me is that clear alignment between what you want to do and the organization that you need to get that done, to find that organization. Thank you so much for bringing that to the conversation, Connor.
Well, thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much again. Now, for everyone else out there, please make sure to like, subscribe, and join us again for our next Top Innovator series. And until then, keep your brain cells active.